Good afternoon and welcome to the Groveland Council on Aging, our November Ladies' Tea. I'm glad you were all able to come. It's a cold day, but it's very warm and nice in here.
Yes.
I'd like to introduce you in a moment to our speaker, who is much sought after and a wonderful man. Give you a little heads up in advance. On December 11th, these are some things you'll see in our December newsletter. On December 11th, right here in the center meeting room, we'll be having our annual holiday party. Music will be provided by the students at Pentucket High School once again, so it's really fun. Goodies will be provided by our friends of the Council on Aging group. The Groveland Police Association always donates coffee and goodies. And this year, a gift basket will be provided by Minicello Insurance. So, that's going to be happening on Thursday, December 11th, high noon right here. I'd like to particularly thank this month Nisha Burke and Vanessa Carmen for all of the good work today while we try to get some other things done office-wise. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Gus Reusch, Haverhill resident, longtime educator, who's going to be giving the program on Robert Frost and John Greenleaf Whittier, their similarities and differences.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be here again. I love coming to Groveland Council on Aging. And you people are a great group. I love coming here. And it gets me away from my wife's honey-do list. No. No, she's gone to yoga, so I'm all right. Going to do something a little different today because we have two wonderful poets who came from this area. And everyone knows this fellow, Robert Frost. And this is a recording, and someday I probably will bring this here and bring my phonograph and play this so you can listen to Robert Frost recite his own poems.
Yay.
His old gravelly voice. He's an old man when he did this. And I have something rather new.
Oh, wow. Oh, what a beautiful, nice picture.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, it's lovely.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
See, I'm looking for all these great comments, because this was done by Mark Hayden of Bradford. He's a John Singleton Copley Master from Boston. And on Mr. Whittier's 200th birthday, which was 2007, Mark came to the birthplace because we had wet paint day, an auction, and over 30 artists came that day, and they did all kinds of paintings about Whittier and Whittierland, and at the end of the day they were all auctioned off. Well, this is not the original, but the original is hanging in the birthplace because the trustees thought it was really done well, so they made sure they got it. About 2 months ago, Mark Hayden came to my house while I was out doing some yard work, and he had this for me as a present.
Wow.
As a present.
Oh, wow. That nice.
But there's a story behind it, see. When he was at the birthplace to do a portrait of Mr. Whittier, he asked me to sit for it. I had my beard. I had my Quaker beard, my Whittier beard. And so I sat in Sarah Greenleaf Whittier's rocking chair, and Mark started painting. I was sitting there all day long, and it was wonderful. People came in to watch him working on it. And so I lay claim to a little bit of fame here.
Yes.
Because, see, Mark wanted a beard that was three-dimensional. And I had it. And so I sat there. He didn't want to do a beard from a book or another painting. He wanted the three-dimensional beard because he wanted to get the highlights in the windows, the natural light coming through. So I sat for that. So there's a little bit of me in this. Although Mr. Whittier was 5 feet 10 inches tall. No one knows that when we do snowbound because they make me sit down. But that works out. All right. Now I brought a couple of other things to show you today because Whittier and Frost mean a lot to me. Because first of all, I was born and brought up in Lawrence, Robert Frost territory, and now I live in Haverhill and curated down at the birthplace, so I had to bring some very important things.
Oh, boy.
This is for anyone who starts to fall asleep. Better not fall asleep. This is a gavel. The wood came from the Whittier elm tree. That's the tree that Mr. Whittier used to climb when he was a young boy and hide when he was writing his poems. He didn't want any of the boys to know he was writing poems. They were all farm boys. And he was called Greenleaf all the time, which was bad enough. Now he's going to write poems. So he would go up the street, climb the Whittier, the elm tree, and hide and write his poems. In 1957, the Whittier elm came down. They saved the good wood. The good wood was brought to the students of the Haverhill Trade School. And the students did these. All the rich and famous got one of these. I'm neither rich nor famous, but I got one.
Good for you.
Because someone gave it to me. Donald C. Freeman, who was the president of the trustees, the superintendent of schools, and when he started getting quite old, he decided to give some things to people who would value them and show them to other people. He gave me this.
Wonderful.
So when I was a teacher, I used to bring it to school because I was the advisor to the student council, and I let the president of the student council. This meeting will now come to order. He was using the Whittier elm.
Very nice.
Now, not to be outdone, I have something very special in here too. It's starting to fall apart, but this is from the tree outside Robert Frost's home in Derry, New Hampshire. They call this a pie. When that tree, a famous tree at my window tree, that's the tree. When it came down, they sliced it and they sold pieces of this to people. So one of the teachers that I knew since I was in college, I used to go into her class. She taught first grade, Judy Riley. I used to go into her class, and so she knew I had an interest in Robert Frost. So she passed right by there because she lived in Londonderry. So she stopped and got me one. So I have this from Robert Frost home, and this from the Whittier elm.
Very nice.
So this is pretty neat. When I was down at the Council on Aging in Salisbury, a woman came up before and she said, "Oh, that's so precious. My daughter," and then she went into, oh boy. And so I looked down and a piece of bark had fallen off. And I said, "Would you like to take the piece of bark to your daughter?" "Oh, she'll be thrilled." She grabbed it, took it home, and every time I go down there, she reminds me.
Yeah.
My daughter still has it. It's hanging up in the living room.
Oh, wow.
A piece of bark from Robert Frost tree. So I have these.
How cute is that?
All right, here we go. I was going to use the lectern, but I decided I couldn't because the lectern is taller than I am. And you wouldn't be able to see me. You'd see this and that would be probably it. So I'll have to go by this, that's all. I was going to sit down, but if I sit down, then nobody would see me either. That's why as a teacher, I stood up all the time.
Yeah.
I never sat down. Oh, one day I did during a test. Ooh, yes. There was a test in my class and I sat down and I watched everybody very carefully, but I was tired that morning, I don't know why. But when I got up to start walking around the classroom, they said, "Mr. Reusch, you should see the back of your pants." I hadn't dusted that chair since the beginning of the school year. And I had never sat in it, so all the dust from my teacher's chair was all over my backside. That was embarrassing. Embarrassing. Okay. Now where am I? This is a treat for me to come here. You all already know that. But I have to warn you before I start. I turned 80 in August.
What day?
17th.
You're older than me.
What a nice thing to say.
I turned 80 August 23rd.
Oh, can you still run?
I do.
Oh, you still run?
Oh, God.
Oh, that's all right. I'll give you a race afterwards.
Okay.
Around the parking lot.
Right in the back. We'll go around. If you fall down, you pick me up, and if you... I fall down. Okay, here we go. My forgetter is getting better than my rememberer. Some of you have heard this before. I'd like to start with that, so if I make mistakes, people be kind to me. After speaking to a group of students about Mr. Whittier in a Haverhill school, the teacher asked her students to write thank you notes to me. Some of you may have heard this, but maybe most of you haven't. One student asked how old I was when I first met John Greenleaf Whittier.
Oh, no.
How about that? And in the next line, he finishes with this. Mr. Whittier and you must have been very good friends because he gave you so many cool things. It's my collection of John Greenleaf Whittier memorabilia. So, you win some, you lose some. But our little girl at the Walnut Square School, she made up for that. Can everyone hear me first of all?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to be louder than I am at home. A little girl at Walnut Square School. I was there teaching the history of Haverhill so they would know how Haverhill got its name. They found that interesting. And it was recess time. Lunch recess. They started down those old wooden stairs. And I was going home. I had finished. And a little girl with pigtails, wow. First grade, blonde, oh, she was pretty as could be. She'd get out of line and she got right in front of me when I was coming down the stairs. I couldn't get by. And she said, "You're cute." How about that? I was in my 70s. I immediately ran up to the teacher's room and said, "You better be careful what you're teaching these kids at school. You should never say that to an old man."
Oh, my
I
God.
guess I really am getting old. I have a whole bunch of those stories. I go into the schools, I never know what they're going to say. And now for Mr. Frost and Mr. Whittier. I am an expert about neither one of these famous poets, but I have a great interest in the lives and poetry of both. They had a lot in common, but there were differences too. Robert Lee Frost, born in San Francisco on March 26, 1874. He died in Boston's Peter Bent Brigham
Oh
Hospital
my God.
on January 29th, 1963, from prostate cancer.
Oh, wow.
He was 88 years of age, and he is buried in Bennington, Vermont. He
Oh my
liked
gosh.
Vermont. He had quite a few farms up there. He had more farms than I had fingers. John Greenleaf Whittier, born in Haverhill on December 17, 1807, died in Hampton Falls, New Hampshire on September 7, 1892, after suffering a paralytic stroke at the Gove family home. It was a Quaker home, where he was hiding away out there, trying to get away from all the people who would come to visit in Amesbury. He's buried in Union Cemetery in Amesbury on old Route 110, on the way to the beach on the right-hand side. That's where he's buried. He was almost 85 years of age when he passed away. Mr. Whittier died 3 months short of 85 in 1892, the same year that Robert Frost graduated from Lawrence High School
Oh my gosh.
as co-valedictorian with Eleanor Miriam White, who later became his wife. So Frost and Whittier's lives did overlap a bit, and Frost must surely have read Whittier's poem Snowbound, because it was so popular, especially in the schools in those days. He certainly must have read it. Frost's middle name is Lee, L-E-E. That was his father's doing, for his father was a fan of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Imagine Robert Frost named after a Confederate general. Yankee, oh.
Oh.
Whittier's middle name, Greenleaf, was
John
for his grandmother,
Whittier.
Sarah Greenleaf Whittier. As a young boy, he was called Greenleaf at home and at the one-room schoolhouse he attended. His father was John. So in that house, he was never called John. He was always called Greenleaf. He didn't really appreciate that, and I'll come to that in a little while. It is strange that Whittier later became known as the abolitionist poet, who for 30 years wrote many anti-slavery poems, while Frost was named for the Southern general who fought to keep slavery in operation. Very different. Both Whittier and Frost were farmers, but not very good at it. Neither one of them. Oh boy. Frost's first farm was in Derry, New Hampshire. It was a chicken farm. Frost knew nothing about raising chickens. Nothing. His grandfather, I'll get to this too, but his grandfather was giving him a little zing because of what he had done when he was in college. Bailed out. That wasn't good. Whittier was working on the family farm, and I'm quite sure he wouldn't have been interested in farming. Frost loved athletics, including boxing. Boxing. I can picture Robert Frost being a boxer. John Greenleaf Whittier, never happened. He was a pacifist, he was a Quaker, non-violent. That would never have gone. Both Whittier and Frost were teachers. Whittier for one term, a half a year in a school in what we now call Merrimack. Just enough to earn some money to go back to his 1 year of high school at Haverhill Academy. Haverhill Academy is the building that's right next to the Haverhill YMCA, between the YMCA and Sal's Pizza. All the kids know that part, Sal's Pizza. So he taught half a year just to get money to go finish 1 year. Frost was a teacher much of his life. His teaching career brought him to Pinkerton Academy, New Hampshire State Normal School in Plymouth, to Amherst, to the University of Michigan, back to Amherst, back to the University of Michigan, back to Amherst,
Wow.
to Dartmouth, and back to Amherst. was on the move constantly. Mr. Frost also taught at Middlebury College's Bread Loaf School of English in Ripton, Vermont, for over 40 years. He brought great recognition to the Bread Loaves Writers' Conference during his time there. 40 years he would go. 40 years he would help others write, become writers and poets. Both men loved nature, New England, ordinary people, and local places. There are hundreds of New England poems by Whittier and Frost. Whittier concerned himself with the form of a poem, while Frost was all about the sense of sound in the poem. This was a major difference in their poetry. Both poets got involved in politics. Whittier as a state representative from the area of Amesbury. He was in the State House in Boston. He often told people that he had voted for Abraham Lincoln 4 times. Everyone get that? But he had, because twice he voted for Mr. Lincoln for president as a private citizen. The other 2 times he voted for Mr. Lincoln because he was an elector, Massachusetts Electoral College. So he did vote for Mr. Lincoln 4 times. He used to love to stump people with that you have them scratching their heads. What is he talking about? He's lost his marbles. He's getting old. But he liked to give him a little joke every once in a while. People thought he was very stern. He wasn't that stern. The Liberty Republican Party wanted John C. Fremont to be the party's candidate when Mr. Lincoln was running for re-election. The abolitionists did not like that at all. They thought they had a better chance of, with Abraham Lincoln being re-elected, to get rid of slavery than with John C. Fremont. So Mr. Whittier took it upon himself to visit John C. Fremont in Nahant, Massachusetts, when Fremont was taking a vacation. They had a little one-on-one conversation. Mr. Whittier, at the end of the conversation, said, "There's a time to do. There's a time to stand aside." And with that, he left. He wrote a nice poem about John C. Fremont, praising the great qualities of this man. He was buttering him up. Shortly after that, Fremont bowed out. Abraham Lincoln was allowed to run for re-election. So Mr. Whittier had a lot to do with the abolitionists, getting Mr. Lincoln re-elected as President of the United States. A one-on-one conversation often goes a long way. Often. I have a lot of this memorized. Oh boy. Frost was the first poet to take part in the inauguration of a president. We remember this.
Yeah.
Oh, Washington, D.C., John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the snowstorm, the glare, the wind, and poor Mr. Frost standing up there trying to read a brand new poem that he had written for the inauguration. Remember the papers? They were all over the place. LBJ was on his hands and knees trying to get the papers back together again. I remember all of that and feeling so sorry for Mr. Frost. Little did we know that John Fitzgerald Kennedy did not really know anything about the new poem. He wanted another of Frost's poems to be read or recited. The Gift Outright. The Gift Outright, a famous poem. So when Mr. Frost lost track of what was going on up there, he had to revert to the Gift Outright. This one. Do you mind if I read it?
Please do.
I'm not gonna read the other one because the other one is so long
Yeah.
that everyone in Washington DC would have frozen to death by the time it was finished. It was a long, long poem. Oh, yes, you asked for a copy of it one time.
And I have it, thank you.
You have
Thanks
it,
to
and
you.
it's long.
That's so
Yes, I
nice.
remember. The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. The land was ours before we were the land's. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. She was ours in Massachusetts, in Virginia, but we were England's, still colonials, possessing what we still were unpossessed by. Possessed by what we now no more possessed. Something we were withholding made us weak, until we found out that it was ourselves we were withholding from our land of living, and forthwith found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright. The deed of gift was many deeds of war, to the land vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced, such as she was, such as she would become. That's what he read. And John Kennedy was thrilled, because this is the poem he really wanted read. It worked out nicely. I guess someone else was around, stirring up the wind probably that day. I don't know. Something was going on.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the title of the poem that was going to be read. This is just the title. For John F. Kennedy, his inauguration with some preliminary history in rhyme. That's just the title. It was long. I still have a copy of it at home.
Oh,
And I'm glad he didn't have a chance to read that whole thing, because it was a cold day down there. It was cold, and I don't think it would have lasted that long. Awfully cold. And the glare, remember the glare?
I was there.
You were there?
Yeah, I was there.
You were in Washington?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. This is awesome. You were there.
Yeah.
I
It was
wasn't.
cold. It was cold.
Oh. Guess where I was? I was in the seminary.
oh, yeah.
I was in the seminary. I had just come back from Korea. I had had 3 years in the Army. I went from the Army in Korea to the seminary. Wow, that was
Yeah.
quite a change. But I was a rabble-rouser in the seminary. I have to be honest.
So you left.
I was a rabble-rouser. I
How
was
many,
one of,
how many years were you in this, in
I was in
seminary?
there 2 years,
2 years?
2 years. And then I went.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't
And this is
very-
one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I think you'll enjoy this. I was one of the drivers at the seminary, because I was one of the oldest ones. So I would go into the town, New Hamburg, Wapaja Falls, up near Poughkeepsie. And I would go in to get the mail, and I would get the newspapers, and I would get everything that we needed. But I had to keep quiet, because when you're in the novitiate, you cannot read a newspaper, you cannot look at TV. Every one of the letters that you sent home was censored. Yeah, it was,
Really?
it was censored.
Oh, that
Oh,
isn't nice.
So I didn't appreciate much of that. I know I'm wasting time, but this is interesting. I found out that excuse me. Oh, I'm getting confused again. I was in the seminary when John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated. Assassinated.
My God.
See, I had been in the seminary twice.
Really?
The first time I thought I didn't give it a good enough shot, so I went back in. So I was in, when he became president, I was in
When he was young.
when he was assassinated.
Is that a trick?
And I found out he was assassinated,
Yeah.
and not a word was said to any of the seminarians.
What?
And I thought, this is a Catholic seminary, and this is a Catholic president who was assassinated. And so I rebelled.
I don't blame you.
I rebelled. I wrote my note home. I knew it was going to be read by the prior. And I said, this is terrible. Seminarians not even knowing that John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a Catholic president, has been assassinated.
Oh my
And
God.
we have been told that we're going to just go to regular classes. I don't think that's right.
No. it
I got
wasn't
a
right.
call to go to the priors. What is this you're sending home? So I cut it out with the prior. We didn't get along too well. But on the day of the funeral, we saw TV. We saw it all on TV. Sometimes it's good to stir the pot.
Yeah. Oh, positively.
Sometimes
I
it
believe
is.
that.
So I did get to see that.
Wow.
We all did.
Yeah,
The
good.
TV set was rolled in and, wow, that was like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that was much better than trying to translate the life of Saint Augustine from Latin to English.
Oh dear God.
All right. Frost tried to defrost the Cold War and bring about world peace. That's what he tried to do. Both poets became internationally famous after early years of struggle, sadness, and poverty. Whittier for Snowbound, Barefoot Boy, Lord Muller, Barbara Frietchie, In School Days, Telling the Bees, and many others, including his strong, very strong, anti-slavery poems. Frost for Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, Mending Water, The Road Not Taken, Birches, and countless others. Frost married and had 6 children, but Whittier never married, although he certainly had his chances with more than a few young admirers, especially after Snowbound, when he got rich. He always seemed to have an excuse for not getting married. When I was young, I had no money. I could not get married. Later, when I had some money, I had to take care of my mother, my aunt, and my sister. That was down in Amesbury. Finally, when I had lots of money, I was too old. I was too old.
Yeah.
Those are his 3 excuses. But he came close a number of times. But for religious reasons, you had to be a practicing Quaker, not just Quaker in name only. You had to be a practicing Quaker. And that never worked out. And besides that, he didn't like the bonnets that the Quaker women had to wear. That's in some of his biographies too. He did not like those. Thought they were hideous. Both Whittier and Frost thoroughly enjoyed New England, especially its nature, everything around here. They traveled a lot in New England. Frost especially, he was everywhere. He had 5 farms in Vermont, just Vermont. But not too much farming ever took place on those farms. Those were like his hideaways. He would go there and, that's where he wrote his poems. He'd get away. Whittier would have to escape Amesbury and hide in other places. If you were a Quaker family, you might look out your front window some day and say, who's this man coming up to our house? It was Whittier. He would escape from Amesbury under the cover of darkness, and he would go to another Quaker home. They wouldn't even know he was coming. I'd like to stay here for a while. And so he did. And that's where he caught up with his correspondence, and he wrote more poems by hiding. And people were glad to have him there. He was famous after Snowbound, so they were glad to have him. The 2 men traveled a lot. Frost all over the country and all over parts of the rest of the world. Frost was well known. Whittier, in an earlier time, managed to travel to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., because he was a leader of the Anti-Slavery Society. 30 years, that's what he, William Lloyd Garrison, did. Both poets had more than their share of sadness. Whittier's life was often in danger as a leading abolitionist, even up north. The South had the slaves and cheap cotton. The North had the mills to use that cheap cotton, so many Northerners did not want slavery to end, especially the mill owners. And also because of greed. Civil War came about because of greed also. That's mostly involved even today. Even today. Whittier's father, John, and Uncle Moses died when Whittier was in his early 20s. His brother, Matthew Franklin, married a non-Quaker, so he was no longer in the Society of Friends. His beloved sister, Elizabeth, was a fragile person who was sickly much of her life and died way before her time. It was his niece, Lizzie, Matthew Franklin's daughter, who came to the Amesbury home to help her Aunt Elizabeth as Elizabeth's life was coming to an end. And then she stayed there for 20 years, helping her uncle, especially after Snowbound was published and Mr. Whittier became famous. Elizabeth became the hostess of the Amesbury home. She ran the show. She helped out so much. And the conclusion of the Civil War and the end of slavery with President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation uplifted Whittier's spirit after losing most of his family. This brought about the writing of Snowbound. This took him out of sad period of his life. He started writing about his family in an uplifting way. He went back to 1818 when he was living in Haverhill when they had the big snowstorm, and those were happier days. So that's why Snowbound came about. He started writing about them, and his spirits were revived. And Snowbound, too, is a very big success. Happiness once again came into his life. Snowbound was published in 1866, and it was a big hit with people who could relate to a family stuck in a home during a storm. The first printing of Snowbound in 1866 brought Mr. Whittier $10,000. In 1866, he went from poverty-stricken to a very wealthy man. And then the money kept rolling in because everyone wanted him to write poems for their magazines, their newspapers, and he was naming his price. He started writing for the Atlantic Monthly magazine and got their subscriptions up there. Everyone wanted something from Mr. Whittier. All right, next sheet. I got so many sheets. My wife thinks,
No way.
Frost lost most of his family before their time. His mother died of cancer in 1900. Then Frost had to commit his younger sister Jeannie to a mental institution, and she died there 9 years later. Both he and his mother had nervous breakdowns, and they, along with his wife Eleanor, had many periods of depression. His daughter Irma was also committed to a mental institution in 1947.
Oh, wow.
Son Elliot died of cholera at age 8.
Oh.
Son Carol committed suicide at age 38. His daughter Marjorie died after childbirth at age 29. And his daughter, Eleanor Bettina, died 3 days after birth in 1907. His wife had heart problems all her life. She had breast cancer in 1937, and she died a year later from heart failure at age 64. Daughters Leslie and Irma who was still institutionalized, were the only offspring to outlive their father. He had a tough,
Yeah.
tough life, very, very sad family life. It is difficult to understand how Robert Frost managed to write so many wonderful poems with all that grief. But he once said, these are his words, "In 3 words I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on." That's how he survived all of that.
Yeah.
At one point, though, he had a pistol to his head. And it was his daughter, Leslie, who talked him out of it.
Oh.
I've done a lot of research, and that was tough for me to see. But I could understand with all the sadness of his life. I don't know how he wrote those beautiful poems. It staggers my imagination, it does. Both men were recipients of many awards. Both worked for newspapers. Both wrote a great deal of prose in addition to the poetry. Whittier wrote about the legends of New England. Some of his poems became hymns, and at age 23, he wrote his famous pamphlet, Justice and Expediency. Justice, free the slaves. Expediency, now. This was long before the Civil War. That pamphlet got him into great trouble, even up north. Frost wrote many essays and even a play. While Frost loved public speaking and saying his poems, especially on college campuses, Whittier did not enjoy speaking engagements. He would rather write poems, letters, and essays, but he didn't like being out there in the limelight. He was rather subdued that way. Though he never graduated from college, Robert Frost, though he never graduated from college, Robert Frost had more than 40 honorary degrees, even from Harvard.
Oh, my God.
Even from Harvard, where he had dropped out in his early years before the dairy farm. His grandfather was an overseer in the mills in Lawrence. He had graduated from Harvard. Even Robert Frost's father had graduated from Harvard. And now his grandfather is getting him into Harvard. He didn't like it. He dropped out after 2 years. That's why he wound up with the farm, folks. His grandfather said, "Oh, you went to Dartmouth and you bailed out up there, too interested in playing ball and everything. Now you're bailing out of Harvard. Now you're going on a chicken farm, fella." And that's what happened to him. Chicken farm. He knew nothing about raising chickens. Robert Frost's poetry won 4 Pulitzer Prizes, and he was Poet Laureate of Vermont and the most loved poet of the United States. Whittier, with only 1 year of high school, was elected overseer of Harvard University by the Massachusetts General Court. He was also trustee of Brown University with 1 year of high school. Whittier received an honorary Master of Arts degree from Harvard and an honorary degree of Doctor of Laws, also from Harvard. He was called the Bard of Freedom and the Poet Laureate of Abolition. Mr. Whittier became a friend of Longfellow, Holmes, Lowell, Bryant, Emerson, Celia Thaxter, Sarah Orne Jewett, Lydia Maria Child, Lucy Larcombe, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Louisa May Alcott, Frederick Douglass. That's just to name a few. After Snowbound, he was up there with the best. He was invited to Concord when the poets and the writers met at Concord, Massachusetts. He was invited to go to Boston for the Saturday night club. He would go. But he didn't like one thing: no women were invited. That was not a good thing. Both poets, both Whittier and Frost were enshrined in the American Poets Corner in New York City's St. John the Divine Church. And Mr. Whittier was enshrined the same day as Ernest Hemingway. Same day. Both poets were influenced by Scotland. Scotland. The little poetry book given to Whittier by his grade school teacher, Joshua Coffin, was a book of poems by Robert Burns. Robert Burns. If you don't know that little story, Joshua Coffin, his grade school teacher, one-room schoolhouse, he would read a poem to the children every day. And one day, Joshua Coffin had to stay at the Whittier home because he couldn't get all the way to his home in Newbury, across the Merrimack, because of a winter storm. And as soon as Joshua Coffin went into Mr. Whittier's home, Greenleaf was after him. And I imagine he said it this way: "Dost thou have thy book of poems by Burns?" He didn't say, "Do you have the book of poems
Yeah.
by Burns?" He didn't say anything like that. And he was given the book, he took it upstairs, he started reading that book of poems by Burns, which wasn't easy. Not easy. Scotch. Whoa. But his teacher helped him conquer that book. Then he bothered that teacher so many times to use the book in the schoolhouse that the teacher finally said, "Here, the book is yours."
Yeah.
The book is yours. He took it with him all his life long. It's a very small book. And when he died, it was brought to the birthplace in Haven. And it's in a display case there. And if you ever come there, I will show you that little book of poems. And, ooh, I better tell you this afterwards because I think I'm on the air. I don't want to be in big trouble.
Oh, okay.
No, I'll tell you anyway.
Yeah.
At 80 years of age,
That's fine.
my first day at the birthplace, I didn't want to be telling people that that little book of poems was by Robert Burns if I was not positively sure it was. So I had a pair of gloves, and I lifted up the cover of the book. And it says in there, "Poems by Robert Burns."
Oh, good.
So for the last 7 years, I've been positive when I
Yeah.
tell people that's the book of. I'm probably in trouble now with the trustees of the birthplace.
We won't tell.
No, you won't be.
We won't
You-
tell.
No, but you had your gloves
Oh,
on.
wait.
You had your gloves on. You were all set.
I had my gloves on. I was on it.
Yeah.
Oh. You win some, you lose. Okay.
He's delightful.
While in the British Isles, that's when Robert Frost went to the British Isles. Remember this? Just before World War II, he sold the dairy farm and he moved to England. He wanted to have a different outlook on life for a while. It was the topography of Scotland which reminded him of his dairy farm. He got very homesick. And then he took his family for walks out in the country, and he saw the stone walls. Then we got mending wall. He saw the birch trees. Then we got birches. Then he saw the farmers out there with their scythes on their farms. And we got mowing. 3 famous poems by Robert Frost. He wrote those while he was in England,
Wow.
thinking of Derry, New Hampshire,
Sure.
just like of his farm. Frost was not a rich man at the time. He returned from a few years in England at the beginning of World War I. He didn't want to jeopardize his family. World War I, he got on a ship, and they sailed out under the cover of darkness escorted by destroyers. We went up around the northern part of Ireland, and the rest of the trip home was very calm. But a few weeks after that, taking the same journey, the same route, Lusitania went to the bottom, with 1,000 people on it. That was the same trip, the same route that Robert Frost had taken a few weeks earlier. Mr. Frost got home, and to find he's already famous in the United States. Already famous. Couldn't believe it. See, back in England, a woman, Mrs. Nutt, N-U-T-T, she was a publisher, and she published 2 volumes of Mr. Frost's poems over there. And they were a success. What he didn't know was that they traveled across, and when he landed, he was welcomed as a hero. So here he is, with his poems already published in England. As soon as he got home, Holt and Company published the same 2 volumes in this country. And from then on, he was famous. And it was Scotland that got him going. And it was Robert Burns of Scotland that got Mr. Whittier going. Very strange situation. Whittier was very serious quite often, like most Quakers. However, it has been written that Whittier, quote, is always awake to the humorous side of things, and you cannot entertain him in any way more certainly than by telling him bright, witty stories. He catches the point instantly and eagerly, but the wit must be of a quiet order. No roistering for him. Roistering, nice word. That's supposed to be a lot of noise. No noise from Mr. Whittier. Frost, on the other hand, often had a little twinkle in his eye. He wrote, "It takes all kinds of in and outdoor schooling to get adapted to my kind of fooling." He fooled a lot with his poetry. And he also wrote to God, "Forgive, O Lord, my little jokes on thee, and I'll forgive thy great big joke on me." Wonder what happened after that. But Whittier could be humorous at times, even at age 5. When his younger brother was born, the family was considering what the baby's name should be. Greenleaf suggested a name that was worse than his. Peachleaf. He wanted his baby brother to be called Peachleaf. Peachleaf. That's because he must have been looking out the windows and they had apple trees, pear trees, and peach trees. That came out of his mouth. Peachleaf. He was getting even for Greenleaf. But the baby's name did not become Peachleaf. It became Matthew Franklin. And in the house, his baby brother was called Frank. And he, the older brother, is still called Greenleaf. So he had a little sense of humor. He did. After long, tough times, both poets eventually became famous and wealthy. They were giants in their times. It's hard for us to imagine John Greenleaf Whittier being a rock star back then, but that's what he was. After Snowbound, he was a rock star. So many people visited Amesbury that he started calling them pilgrims. The pilgrims have invaded Amesbury. That's when he sought relief by escaping and hiding in other places. For an epitaph, Robert Frost would have, "I had a lover's quarrel with the world." And he did. A lover's quarrel with the world. And that's on his gravestone. While John Greenleaf Whittier's last spoken words were, "My love to the world," and he passed away. Quite different. In the early 60s, I was thrilled to see and listen to Robert Frost say his poems at Boston College. It was a night that I will never forget. I was on the baseball team at Lowell State Teachers College. And the baseball teams, we got together and said, Robert Frost is going to be at BC tonight. Let's go. And I had an old car. It was so rickety that we called it the Ball. We expected it to blow up at any
Yeah.
moment. We headed for Boston College. We got a flat tire. We were all dressed up, you know. Now we have to fix a flat tire with a trench coat on. It was all greased by the time I finished. We got there, they let us in, and we didn't look too good. They let us in, we leaned against the back wall, and we saw Robert Frost leaning on the lectern up front. Wow, what a treat. He had no papers, no books in front of him, nothing. And the students of Boston College would shout out a title of a poem, and off he'd go. It was, what is going on here? Everything was in here. Everything was up here. No book, no piece of paper, nothing. It was something I'll never forget. Never. It was quite a treat. I'm glad they let us in too. It looked like I had dumped into the Spigot River. On John Greenleaf Whittier's 200th birthday, I was asked to read Mr. Whittier's poem, My Birthday, at the birthday party in the Haverhill Public Library auditorium. Mr. Whittier had written the poem, My Birthday, when he turned 65, thinking that he wasn't going to last much longer. He lasted about 20 years longer. Now, I have to explain this. On December 17th, 2007, his 200th birthday, they had a poetry vigil in the birthplace. And I wasn't curator then, but I signed up to read some poems to the visitors. I signed up for 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
We had a blizzard. I didn't get to the birthplace until 5 o'clock in the morning. No one's there except the 2 curators. And as soon as I stepped in, they said, "We're glad you're here, Gus. We're going to bed." Now I'm all by myself in the birthplace. We had been told to get 20 poems ready, go over 20 poems to read to the people who attended the vigil. One of them was my birthday. Later that day, I was asked to read that poem at the library. Worked out nicely. But I read 20 of Mr. Whittier's poems out loud to no one but the snowflakes. I thought I was in Snowbound. The wind was howling outside, draft coming down the chimney. I'm sitting in Sarah Greenleaf's rocking chair, his grandmother's rocking chair. I figured I didn't want to fall asleep, so I might as well keep on moving. And I read those. It was like I was in another world. It was awesome. And who came to relieve me much later? The former mayor of Haverhill, Jim Reusch. And he asked me to read a poem to him. And so I said, sure, I'll do that. And it was called Mr. Whittier's poem, Kathleen. Because Mr. Reusch's wife's name is Kathleen. So I read that poem to Mr. Reusch. There was only 2 in the house. And then he started writing poems, and that let me go home. But I didn't go home. I was called down to the Haverhill Library auditorium because since I was Mr. Whittier that day, I was to read the poem at his birthday party. It was a strange party. The kids in the culinary arts department at Whittier Vocational Technical School had made a birthday cake for Mr. Whittier. It was awesome. It was 5 feet long, it was 3 feet wide, and it weighed 457 pounds. That was a birthday cake. That was a birthday cake. They had a little trouble because of the snowstorm. In fact, they had a lot of trouble because of the snowstorm. They couldn't get it out of Whittier Votech. They had to call up Bresnahan Moving Company.
Oh, no.
Bresnahan Moving Company went to the school, used plywood underneath the cake, and got it down to the Haverhill Public Library, and then they couldn't get it in.
Oh.
Because there's a metal piece between the doors, and the doors are very narrow. And the poor kids who had made the cake, luckily they were there, and they had their culinary arts tools with them. They had to slant the cake and get it
Oh,
through the
yeah.
door.
Oh, my gosh.
They had to slant it through. And I thought, oh my Lord, everything's gonna come sliding off and be on the floor.
Yeah.
Nothing moved. Nothing moved.
Oh, yeah.
And this is miraculous because on the top of the cake, which had frosting about this thick and cake about this thick, on the top of the cake, the culinary arts students had made the birthplace, the barn across the street, and the shed where the blacksmith shop had been years ago, out of chocolate from Switzerland.
Oh, gee.
That's on top.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking, oh boy, this is gonna be bad. Nothing moved. And I found out why.
Uh-oh. What did they?
Because when I had a piece of the cake later, that frosting was pretty thick, almost like concrete. So nothing was going to come off the cake. And nothing did. So it was a wonderful birthday party.
Yeah.
So they asked me to read Mr. Whittier's poem on my birthday, and I had practiced it already, so that was all right. And all the politicians were there. It was I felt a little bit out of place being there, but it worked out very nicely, and I'm glad the cake went through the process.
Yeah.
And I was promised some of the chocolate.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
how? They said there's a freezer down at the birthplace. You'll store that away, and you'll be able to have some because you're going to be the curator in the summer. I never got any.
Oh.
They didn't have a freezer at the birthplace. I have to be honest about that. So I never got any of the chocolate. Anyway, that was quite a birthday. Wow. So that's on Mr. Whittier's 200th birthday. On Robert Frost's 135th birthday, I read his famous poem, Reusch's, at Northern Essex Community College to a large group of lifelong learners. So I'm reading 2 of these poems on their birthdays. I'm probably the only one in the world to have had the opportunity to read about those 2 poems aloud on the birthdays of those 2 very famous literary figures. I thought that was, that's nice.
Yeah.
I love doing that. In many ways, the lives and poetry of John Greenleaf Whittier and Robert Frost were quite similar. But we know that there were major differences too. We are so fortunate that Whittier and Frost put pen to paper for people to read and to enjoy. In closing, I will read 2 very different poems about the hereafter. Mr. Whittier's At Last, which was read to him on his deathbed in Hampton Falls, New Hampshire, by his cousin, Gertrude Whittier Cartland, from Newburyport. And then I will read Mr. Frost's playful Away. At Last is a very spiritual poem. It's a very beautiful poem. If you've never read Mr. Whittier's At Last, you should. Many literary people ask to have that read at their funerals. I'm gonna ask to have that read at mine.
Sure.
It's a beautiful spiritual poem. I'm so sorry. This is Mr. Frost away. Now I out walking the world desert, and my shoe and my stocking do me no hurt. I leave behind good friends in town. Let them get well wined and go lie down. Don't think I leave for the outer dark, like Adam and Eve put out of the park. Forget that myth. There is no one I am put out with or put out by. Unless I'm wrong, I but obey the urge of a song. I'm bound away, and I may return if dissatisfied with what I learned from having died. I'll read that last part one more time.
Yeah.
You can picture Robert Frost
Oh,
doing this. Oh, yes. Unless I'm wrong, I but obey the urge of a song. I'm bound away. And then he hesitates. And I may return if dissatisfied with what I learned from having died. And I still think
Love
he's
it.
here.
Love it.
He's probably still here.
Thank you so much. That was delightful.
Guess what I'm not going to do when I go home?
Well, you won't tell you.
Tell my wife.
Oh,
What he's not gonna do.
He's not gonna tell his
that
wife.
she will not give me my allowance.
Well, don't let her watch the TV then.
Yeah. Thank you, that was
Some of that-
wonderful.
Thank you, Gus.
Thank you. Thank you.